Hi everyone, welcome back to Cat's Weekly Film Review. This week we'll be covering the documentary Fight by Ervin Chartrand, who is a Métis and Ojibwe writer, producer, and director from Pine Creek First Nations in Manitoba. Let's get into the film, shall we? This film is an incredibly touching and raw story about a pro boxer turned high school teacher who recruits two young Indigenous men to the high school's boxing team in hopes of inspiring them to be more engaged in school and up their attendance, as well as teaching them the work ethic and discipline necessary for them to succeed later on in life. Melvin DeLorme and Renee Catchaway both come from very, very rough backgrounds. They're two Winnipeg 18-year-olds. Unfortunately, Melvin grew up in a home that was rife with domestic violence. He speaks about how his mom's partners would regularly beat him while his mother stood by and did nothing. And we can see that the emotion there is very raw. And unfortunately, throughout the film, we do get to get in touch a little bit with the effects of PTSD and how Melvin is experiencing PTSD. As well, unfortunately, Renee is living in an extremely underfunded housing block where crime runs rampant. He speaks a lot to the experiences he's had with loud banging, arguments, domestic disputes, regular police presence, and he also mentions how often he's afraid to even open his front door, which is really shocking and also brings a lot of attention to the housing crises within Indigenous communities. As the boys start their training, we get to witness a lot of camaraderie between the two of them. And we also get to see their motivation to do better in school, as well as their motivation to graduate, increase exponentially. I think this is a really important documentary, as it perfectly captures the struggle of being an Indigenous teen and touches upon a lot of really important issues that are plaguing Indigenous teens in Canada. Let's get on to discussing topics and issues that are mentioned within this film. So the first big thing that is very touched upon and very spotlighted throughout this documentary is the dropout rate among Indigenous students. Randy Bolesky, the teacher who recruits Renee and Melvin to the boxing team, is mainly concerned about the boys dropping out of high school, as Indigenous students are only half as likely to graduate high school within 4 years than other students. And unfortunately, Melvin will end up dropping out of high school throughout the documentary, but he does return later to get his GED. Another issue that is touched upon is gang violence. There is continuous mention of gang violence and the issues that gang violence poses within the Indigenous communities, as well as endangering the lives of the kids that do end up dropping out of high school. We also get to hear a lot about domestic violence and Melvin's experiences with it. As I mentioned before, Melvin was ruthlessly beaten by his mother's partners, almost killed a couple of times, and resulting from that we have PTSD, which is the fourth topic that is really brought up within this documentary. PTSD is something that affects a huge percent of the population and can be really debilitating, and we get to see that as Melvin does have flashbacks and does have PTSD episodes during the documentary. And the last topic that I would like to bring up is the issue of low-income housing and the housing crisis within Indigenous communities. As I said before, Renee lives in an extremely underfunded housing block, and unfortunately that causes a lot of issues for him, and his standard of living is very much subpar. Now I'd really like to show you guys a quick clip of the documentary, just so that you can kind of get a sense of what's going on.
The quiz next week will be simply cut and paste from these booklets, from these questions, so there will be nothing new. Okay, Rennie, let's go next door and have a chat for a minute. I work at St. John's High School as a pre-employment teacher for at-risk students. At risk of not graduating, that is. Rennie is a little bit cavalier in his work ethic. Some of my colleagues are getting a little bit frustrated.
What are the things that are stopping you from getting here before 9 o'clock most days?
Usually just take long to get things done before I come here.
I I've seen huge gains and huge maturity, but I've had running for 3 years. Someone else might not see the gains. You didn't quite make 11 last year. We've made a deal with you. If you motivate yourself, if you can work above and beyond, we will push you up. That sound like a plan?
So I pretty much I got shit. I gotta catch up now.
Melvin is doing very good academically. He's very bright. He's very anxious to do well at whatever he does. I actually recruit a lot of my own boxing students, and my hope is that the discipline they learn and how to train is something that they will be able to transfer into academics, into jobs, places of employment, into relationships.
I have no interest in fighting on the street anymore. Take too many chances, your number might come up one day.
I met Rennie and Melvin, and I see a lot of fighters come through here with good intentions at the beginning, and a lot of times you see how much work it is, and you have to actually you have to change a lot of your life and a lot of your routine and your habits and stuff, and you have to change a lot of things to be a boxer, and it takes a lot of commitment.
Once you guys make a commitment, you will not be mortal human beings anymore. You will be boxers. And it will change everything in your life. Melvin, would you be willing to throw in support for Rennie academically?
Yeah, I could be there.
You're a witness to this. This boy is going to get himself to grade 12. He will do the work. He will graduate in June. Okay, we've got witnesses. I'm going to hold you to it.
And now on to the production elements. Ervin Chartrand really does a great job of conveying emotion in this documentary. I think one of the most important things is watching the boys work out and train. We get to see a lot of footage of these boys putting in a ton of effort to turn their lives around. And I think it's really important to show that work and show that work ethic and prove that Indigenous people are not just lazy and that these boys really are trying their best. The second production element that I would like to mention is the background noise when we go to visit Rene at his apartment. We hear sirens, there's banging, arguing, and yelling in the background, which I think was put in on purpose to really convey and hammer home the point that Rene's not living in a good situation, and a lot of Indigenous people aren't because of underfunded housing. As well, the third production element that I would like to touch upon is the inclusion of Melvin's flashbacks. Unfortunately, when Melvin spars for the first time, which is when he actually properly fights someone for the first time, he is immensely triggered, and it triggers PTSD flashbacks from when he was being beaten. Unfortunately, this inspires Melvin to quit boxing, but I think this really emphasizes the effect that PTSD and trauma can have on your day-to-day life and how it can affect you a lot later in life than when it happened. I would now like to connect this documentary to an ongoing and current issue, and that is the disproportionate rates of domestic violence within Indigenous communities and against Indigenous women. Unfortunately, Indigenous women are about twice as likely as non-Indigenous women to experience physical abuse at the hands of an intimate partner, and they're 3 times as likely to be threatened with a weapon, choked, or beaten. And unfortunately, as many Indigenous communities are underfunded and underprotected by government services, there are no resources for these women to get help, get counseling, for their husbands or partners to get counseling, and for them and their children to escape the situation. And so the cycle of abuse will continue, and this is a big part of intergenerational trauma. As you see with Melvin, PTSD and trauma from his childhood affects him to this day. I think this documentary is incredibly important, as it really showcases the struggles faced by a lot of Indigenous high schoolers and students in general. And I think this could really help many students to understand what it is like as an Indigenous youth, and to help them relate a little bit more to Indigenous people, and instead of always being shown adults. I think showing this documentary in classes would really help them grasp the seriousness of the situation and at how young of an age issues with Indigenous people will start to affect their youth.